esta segunda conferencia de este ciclo de conferencias sobre medición de infraestructura. I'm going to switch into English very fast. This is September 20. We're in the second conference of this cycle of conferences on infrastructure measurement. We have with us Juan Carlos Moreno-Brid as the chair of the session, and Eurydice Fotopolou, Domenica Rasulo, and Regan Hughes from the Office of National Statistics from the UK with the conference. So I will share the floor to Juan Carlos and the rest. Thank you.
Ricardo, bueno, empiezo en español. Bienvenidos, buenos días a este muy importante evento del Instituto Nacional de Estadística del INEGI con el apoyo de la Oficina Nacional de Estadísticas de Inglaterra. Now I'll switch to English. Welcome, thank you very much for being here, all of you. Let me just very briefly introduce Dr. Eurydice. We have three great researchers, three great presentators. It's Dr. Eurydice Fotopolou, Dr. Domenica Rasulo, and future Dr. Regan Hughes. One day she'll be a doctor, I assume. Eurydice, she's the head of the non-financial asset development in the productivity investment and research division at the Office of National Statistics. Before joining the ONS, she had a brilliant career in academics. She holds a PhD in economics by the University of Greenwich. She worked at SOA, she worked in China, Turkey, I mean, in many, many places. Thank you very much for being here. I'll also let me introduce as well Domenica and Regan. Domenica, she has a BA in sociology and a PhD in demography in the Max Planck Institute, very, very impressive, an MSc in applied statistics. She worked at the University of Rome at the Max Planck Demographic Research. She has a long story, a long history of publications. She has worked in director methodology, economic statistics, prices, productivity, actually, you name it. I suppose she could also teach us in many, many other fields of economics, applied economics. And Regan, she's going to be a PhD one of these days, but so far she's very, very young. This is my envy. I used to be that age many, many years ago. She's also at the Office of National Statistics and worked on developing experimental statistics. Thank you, the three of you. Thank you very much for being here, and thanks for helping us in this, for Mexico, very important project. The floor is yours, and the idea is that you'll speak, well, between yourselves, you divide the time between yourselves, and it's going to be like, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour more or less. I'll be trying to guide you in the use of time, but please feel free to use the time as you think it's better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us today, and good morning to everybody joining us from different parts of the Atlantic for this meeting. We are very grateful to INEGI for having us today, and we hope that what we will present will be useful. The presentation is shared between me and my colleagues Domenica and Regan. Domenica and Regan are the core of my team. They are the people that worked on this project to put everything together, pull the data from different sources, and develop the methodology. So I will start by sharing my screen, and I hope that this works, which means I will not be able to see the chat once I go to presentation mode. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes, it's perfect.
Lovely. So as you very kindly said in your introduction, my team is the non-financial assets development team. It's an economic research team within the Productivity Investment and Research Division of the Office for National Statistics. This set of statistics is experimental statistics. That means that they are not part of the national accounts, and that is for a number of reasons that we are going to outline in this presentation. How we have structured the work that we are discussing today. I will introduce the background. So what was the thinking behind the decision to start publishing infrastructure statistics? Then Domenica is going to talk about the methodology for infrastructure in the market sector. And her presentation is such that would allow another country to replicate what we have done in the market sector. And she's going to talk about things such as the permanent the PIM, for which you have another session with my colleagues later on in October. Regan is going to present some of the key findings and the insights we can get from those for economic policy. And we will close with further developments, how we are taking this work ahead, and leave time for questions and answers. Now, why infrastructure investment and why does it matter? Knowing how much money goes into infrastructure for a country is essential when a country wants to design productivity and inclusiveness policies, especially when they are looking for a shift between different types of stages of their developmental journey, so from manufacturing into services and so on. And it also is essential to understand whether citizens of a place have equal access to services and opportunities for their own quality of life. That is, opportunities to learn, to travel, to work, to collaborate, to spend time with their loved ones, and develop not only their economic capabilities, but also their human capital. This work started by a piece that Joe Grice, our former chief economist, published in 2016. He outlined the thinking behind infrastructure, and looking into the data available at that time, he pulled out 6 different aspects available in the data that could be used to measure infrastructure. That is transport, energy, water and waste, communications, flood defenses, and street lighting. This brief definition, or this very functional definition, focuses on what is core economic infrastructure. We have more or less been publishing along these lines for the last 5 years, and we have 3 publications so far, in 2017, 2018, and 2022. I would like to explain the gap. The gap is because there was no team to look after the work after 2018, and our team is relatively new. We got together almost a year and a half ago, and since then we have been looking after this work. The 2022 publication brings out experimental data up to 2020, and it covers the UK. When we talk about the UK, we mean Scotland, Wales, England. For us in the UK, this work is quite important when we start thinking about the future. And there are 2 main paths to developing this work to serve the needs of our users in the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years. One strand relates to climate change and the net zero priorities of the country. And the second one is understanding systems of infrastructure for the needs of a modern economy, where we see countries like the UK becoming more and more digitalized. What does this mean for the needs of users of infrastructure? What type of data they need, and how does this inform policy? I said that Joe Grice focused on the functional definition of infrastructure. That is because there is no internationally agreed definition on what exactly is infrastructure in the guidebooks, in the guidelines we use in ESA and the System of National Accounts, SNA. Broadly, it can be considered anything foundational to economic activity. And you understand that this is quite broad, and it leaves in the same time a lot of freedom to a country to decide what they will include. The first article, the 2017 one, goes over the literature review and evaluates the difference between functional infrastructure definition and physical infrastructure definition. It also shows the links between asset and industry, and also the supply and demand interests broadly. This openness of definition, this fuzziness of definition is an essential starting point. Why? Because we start with the nucleus, the core economic infrastructure, and we can develop it well beyond that to include other sides of infrastructure. And here I'm showing what is the UK National Infrastructure Commission framework when we are considering different types of infrastructure. You see at the top of the screen, the dark blue, we're talking about economic infrastructure, the so-called core infrastructure, where we have transport, energy, water, communication, and waste and flood defenses. Quite often you'll find water and waste or sewerage together. Then we are talking about things such as housing stock that we don't measure, although it is quite important for a country that has high housing ownership like the UK. Then we have social infrastructure, that would include investment in education and healthcare. Again, this is not something that we currently measure, but we have interest in measuring. And the pandemic COVID-19 outbreak showed how important it is to know how much investment goes into social infrastructure. And finally, what is called institutional infrastructure. That would include the legal system, and there we will find things such as courthouses and jails. Natural capital, that stresses the importance of land, environment, and what is green infrastructure. And finally, and slightly more remotely, so if we consider the economic infrastructure at the center, human capital will be at the borders of the galaxy in terms of its distance, but nonetheless cannot be excluded. There is some overlap between human capital and education and healthcare infrastructure. Now, when we're talking about this type of infrastructure, more specifically in the system of national account and the European system of accounts, the data comes from what is called other structures in the national balance sheets. What does this mean? That is all structures that are not dwellings or other buildings. In ESA, that can be broken down in 5 categories. Transport other than roads, so for example, rail tracks. Energy, water, flood control and waste management, that would also include sewerage. Communications infrastructure, things such as cables or towers, communications towers. And finally, roads and other publicly owned infrastructure not elsewhere included. The other structures measured isn't the only one that we could adopt. There are discussions and questions about, how about the rolling stock or other vehicles when we're thinking about transportation infrastructure, because the road itself does not provide the service of transporting goods. It's enabling it, but it does not provide it in isolation. You need a truck or a lorry to carry goods. And then how closely can we weave into this the interrelation with human and natural capital? These can have a bearing on how infrastructure assets can be analyzed and interpreted and consequently inform policy, but where do the boundaries lie when we are considering the role of infrastructure assets? Here I have an excerpt of the SNA 2008. I'm not going to read it out, but I would like to point out that public monuments can also be part of infrastructure. Then other things such as land improvements can also be parts of infrastructure. You see, if you delve into this specific excerpt from the SNA, that a country could look at it and decide what data they have, and out of this, if there is a possible way of finding a method to calculate stock and flows, then designed their infrastructure strategy. And this is very similar to our approach to that. We look at what is advised broadly. We look at the needs of the UK economy. We look at the data available, and then we proceed. And these are elements that Domenica is going to present to us now. Thank you very much for this, and I will speak to you again at the end.
Go ahead, Domenica, thank you.
Yes, I'm loading my presentation because I finished just a few minutes ago. Okay, hello everyone. This is Domenica. I'm basically talking about the methodology to measure investment and net stocks for the market sector, especially because we use the national system, national accounts. Basically, this method can be replicated outside the UK, provided the definitions are the same. As Eurydice has mentioned, it's crucial to measure infrastructure to inform policies and interventions. It appears that the higher is infrastructure in a country, the higher is productivity. If you think, for example, of transport, the more developed is transport, then the higher is productivity. And ONS in measuring infrastructure aligns with the National Infrastructure Strategy of the government. This was released in 2020 and sets out the government plans to deliver a radical improvement in the quality of the UK infrastructure. So it's important really for ONS to measure the contribution of infrastructure from private businesses. If you think of telecommunication, then most of the investments come from private sectors. So how do we measure infrastructure? So capital assets are defined as fixed assets with economic lives greater than 1 year in their use in production. And on the other hand, infrastructure has a long-lived nature and has repeated use in production. It follows that infrastructure assets can be thought of as capital assets. And this equation really is important because through that we can really use capital expenditure from the national accounts to measure investments. And investments are really the basic unit that we need in order to measure infrastructure. Then I will say more about that later on as I will talk about investment and capital stocks. So based on this definition that we can really use capital expenditure and that infrastructure assets are capital assets, in ONS we measure both infrastructure in the public and in the private sector. As for the public sector, we extract information from a publication from a different government department, the Treasury, which has government spending for local and central government in line with the European system of accounts. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on the market sector data, which come from the UK national accounts that we publish. So how do we measure infrastructure in the market sector? Joe Grice in 2016 in his paper, Joe Grice was for many years the chief economist in ONS. And he advised to use the definition from the European System of Accounts 2010 to use other structures as a proxy for infrastructure. And as already mentioned by Eurydice, part of the structures include, as you can see, highways, streets, roads, railways. We have then this definition in our national accounts, which align with the HISA, but similarly, this information can be found in the system of national accounts. And as a result of that, we estimate investment and net stocks for market sector using this definition from HISA. If you think of the productive service, then this really are generated by the inflow of investments into forming new infrastructure and by the cumulative sum of investments, which results then in a stock. So then the existing stock is really the cumulative sum of investments adjusted for wear. And as a result of that, we have investment and net stocks as measurement for infrastructure in the market sector using the definition of Joe Grice. Now, specifically, we have 3 publications in the UK about investments and capital stocks for market sector. You can see the publication on the right. Basically, this publication provides the total for investments and for capital stocks. Don't provide the details at the sector level that we present in the publication of infrastructure. As a result of that, we basically request granular data to other teams in ONS, and then we extract the sectors that are currently part of our definition of infrastructure. So basically, we obtain the granular data from other teams. We extract these sectors, the sectors on this list: energy, water supply, sewerage, activities for transportation. And then we have investment and net stocks, because these are basically 2 different teams providing investment and net stocks for other structures. Now I talk a bit about how investment and capital stocks are measured. Investment basically are gross capital formation based on sample service and administrative sources. It can also be defined as estimate of capital expenditure. It's really an estimate because we also take into account information from sample surveys. And we have a quarterly publication about business investment estimates. As for capital stocks are really the cost of replacing the assets at a particular point in time, and we have 2 publications on this. If we are interested in net capital stocks, and this is what we publish for infrastructure, then net capital stocks are gross capital stocks adjusted for the consumption of fixed capital. And now I show how we obtain capital stocks in the UK. Capital stocks are derived using a model called perpetually inventory method. And the OECD described this method as one of the most widely used approach towards measuring stocks of fixed assets. The basic idea is that basically stocks are the cumulative sum of investments, and the model consists of adjusting the cumulative sum of investments for assets lifetime and scrappage of assets. Now, if you think of the asset service life, then in terms of the UK level, really don't know the exact length of each, how long an asset is going to be productive. So we use an estimate based on the number of assets which are part of an industry. And as a result of that, in order to know in order to remove the assets from the capital stocks, we use a probability distribution, which is the uniform distribution. And so basically each asset in the economy has a probability, and based on that probability is removed through time from the capital stocks. So now we know how to compute the gross capital stocks. We have initially a cumulative sum of investments based on gross fixed capital formation. Then we remove the assets accordingly with a probability distribution, and then accordingly with the scrappage happening over the years. And this provides our measure of gross capital stocks. Then in order to obtain net capital stocks, we also adjust for capital consumption. So basically, for the publication the last publication in 2022, we use this measurement, this methodology for market sector, provide information for these sectors from energy to mining and quarrying. We had an investment and net stocks. The time series starts in 1997, and we have both current prices and constant prices. Through constant prices, we can compare investment and net stocks through time to adjust for inflation. And this is an example of current prices for net stocks and investments. This is really the last cross-sectional information that we had in our publication. Then, as it was mentioned before, we have other information. In our publication, we have information for government, local and central. Then we have market sector. And then we have also other information, which really takes into account the richness of service that we have at the ONS. In addition to market sector and government investment, we take into account information from the monthly survey of the construction industry. By using this survey, basically, we are able to provide information at the regional level, and for this list of sectors, both at the private level and at the public level. Then, in terms of future development, clearly, the more granular data we have, the better, because in that way we really see really informed policies and interventions. And at the moment we are collaborating, we are engaging with stakeholders in order to obtain more granular data. If you think, for example, of roads, roads consist of motorways and roads in a city, and they are under different ownership, which result in collaborating with different organizations. And I think this is all for my presentation. Thank you very much for attending. And I think now it's time of Regan.
Thank you very much, Domenica. Regan, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I hope you can see my slides. Just 1 second.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to take you through our key findings from our latest publication. So this data goes up to 2020, and we released these earlier this year. So the first in our installment of statistics are our government investment figures. So as you can see, infrastructure as a share of general government investment has been relatively high for the past 10 years. So over time, it has steadily increased, other than declines in 2008 and 2018 to 2020. So in the 2 years to 2020, it declined from 37.6% in 2015, which was the high, to 31.7% in 2020. Here we break down by, so CG here means central government and LG means local government. And we break these down into transport and other. So the other category here includes all of our infrastructure assets that we identify other than transport, because consistently over time we've seen that transport is the largest share of government investment in infrastructure assets. So in 2020, local government investment in other infrastructure assets increased 20.7% on the year, but its peak growth rate was 52.8% in 2013, which is the peak that you can see in the middle here. Local government transport investment also declined 19% in the year to 2020, while central government investment in transport increased 7.1%, but in 2008, it increased 49.2%, which is the other peak here. Investment in other infrastructure assets by central government in 2020 declined 2.7%. And here you can see government infrastructure investment throughout the time series, again broken down by central government, local government, and by transport or other. So transport remained the biggest type of central and local government investment. So these would be the light blue bars at the bottom here and the grey bars second from the top. Investment of transport by the central government has increased steadily over time, but investment of transport by local government has fluctuated. In 2020, central government transport investment increased 7.1%, but local government transport investment decreased by 19%. Investment of other infrastructure assets by the central government decreased 6% in 2020, and local government investment of other infrastructure assets increased by 20.7%. So as you can see, there's quite a difference in trends between central and local government investment. Here we can see the annual percentage change of infrastructure investment by the same types. So in 2020, investment in other infrastructure assets increased 20.7% on year, but its peak growth rate was 52.8% in 2013. And here you can see the trends over time. So we can see that government investment in infrastructure has steadily increased, other than a slight decline in the 2 years to 2020. And next we have our construction statistics, and we take these from a separate publication on the ONS website. So here we can see total new work versus total repair and maintenance of infrastructure assets in the 10 years leading up to 2020. So as you can see, total repair and maintenance remained relatively constant in the 10 years, but total new work has increased at a growing rate. In 2020, total new work decreased by 16% on the year, but was still £13 billion more than total repair and maintenance. When we look at new work for 2020 by subsector, we can see that construction for electricity was responsible for 41.5% of all new work of infrastructure assets. Railway construction also decreased by 38.9% in the year to 2020, and then accounted for 16.3% of all new work of infrastructure assets. Construction of gas communications and air transport is bundled up into the other category here, and that's because it's consistently the smallest amount even combined. And in 2020 again, it had the lowest share of infrastructure new work at 2.4%, or valued at £538 million. Here again, it tells the same story, that electricity construction increased 37.5% in 2020 and was the largest type of infrastructure construction undertaken. It was valued at £9.4 billion in 2020 and is this blue line at the top here. The second largest type of work was roads, valued at £5.8 billion in 2020. And this second line here would be railways. So in 2019, this was the second largest, or valued at the second highest, but it declined 38.9% in the year to 2020 and then accounted for £3.7 billion. Again, looking at construction by subsector, construction of harbours has increased over time. So these would be the darkest blue bars, which are second from the top. In 2010, its value was £370 million, but in 2020, it was 1.3 billion. And conversely, you can see here that the bars, the other dark blue bars, which are right at the top, are construction of gas communication and air transport. And we can see that these have decreased over time from £1.9 billion in 2010 to £538 million in 2020. And again, electricity, which are these grey bars, third from the bottom, have been the largest type of infrastructure construction since 2014. We also have construction figures by sub-region in the UK. So we either have the countries of Wales and Scotland, and we also have 9 regions of England. So in 2020, Yorkshire and the Humber and the North West infrastructure share of total new work was 37% each, which is up from 13% and 18% in 2019 respectively. Wales had the lowest share of infrastructure construction, and then it was the East Midlands in England. The Southeast infrastructure repair and maintenance share of total repair and maintenance peaked in 2018 at 48%. So as you can see here, is way above any other figure that we have over the time series. And Yorkshire and the Humber share was the largest in 2020, which would be the light blue line here. Again, we can see that in 2020, the percentage change year on year of construction, new work construction, the largest was in Yorkshire and the Humber, which had increased nearly 175%. Meanwhile, construction in the West Midlands declined by nearly 70%. And when we look at repair and maintenance, the percentage change on the year to 2020, the Northeast had increased by 49.5%, whilst Yorkshire and the Humber had declined by 25.2%. And that's it for the key findings. Eurydice, would you like to carry on?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Regan and Domenica. And that brings me to the last part of the presentation today. Before moving on, I would like just to point out one thing about the spikes we saw on the data. In the regional data specifically, new work relates to investment in infrastructure that is related to green or non-fossil fuel energy, such as wind farms. And parts of England attracted large investment for that. And this is the spike we observe in the data. Now, going forward, can you all see slide 23?
Yes.
Lovely. We have in store 3 strands of work, each one with its own challenges. The first one relates to conceptual improvements. How can we include other types of infrastructure in a way that we are responsive to the needs of a modern economy? We have, in the UK, we have loads of initiatives that try to make the country a net zero economy. And here we are trying to accommodate and find sources of data for non-fossil fuel energy infrastructure and how this is different to fossil fuel energy infrastructure. We have been engaging with the private sector, and one of the things that we hear a challenge is that when they invest in equipment, this equipment can be, most of this equipment can be used for for all types of infrastructure. For example, cables can be used for fossil fuel energy and non-fossil fuel energy. And this is one of the challenges. Then how can we tell whether infrastructure is specifically to adopt to climate change, so climate change resistant infrastructure, as opposed to normal everyday improvements in infrastructure? An example of that would be double glazing or insulation. Then the idea of social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and how we go about understanding their net value for the economy as sources of infrastructure. Domenica introduced the perpetual inventory method, but for social infrastructure assets, this would be very different to roads, for example. The same applies to digital infrastructure, where we see changes in software that are so fast that very often innovations in digital infrastructure become obsolete. Finally, again, with these conceptual improvements, we are working along with international bodies such as the OECD to bring people together to discuss and agree on a definition in such a way that it won't be limited to the needs of a modern service-driven economy, but also economies that are in transition. Then we are also trying to implement technical improvements in the statistics that we present. So to get more accurate deflators, to get better sources. Domenica spoke about granularity and how important this is for our data. So in order, for example, to have regional infrastructure data, we need regional infrastructure investment statistics, we need regional infrastructure data. Due to the fact that there are multiple owners of this data and also multiple owners, economic owners of these assets, it is a challenge to find new data sources. So these are broadly the areas that we would like to work on and we have started working on. And that brings this admissions of challenges ahead bring our presentation to the end. We would be very happy to discuss more if you need any clarifications or if you have any questions for us. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much for hosting us.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. Do you want to keep sharing your screen, Eurydice? I don't know, as you like.
Regan, you can unshare.
It's just a question, so anyway.
Yeah, our email is on the screen in case it's needed.
Okay, let me just first of all thank you very much. I'll share some of. I'll give you some comments and basically questions and congratulations. The amount of work that you've done is very, very impressive. You, not only you, the new team, but the team in the UK. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. What you've been doing. I would like to first of all thank you for the clarity of the exposition. It was very, very very well done, and you always insisted on the possibility of replicating your studies or your work, which is I mean, very good for us in Mexico. We're starting this, and you've gone a long way. And in this sense, I have two questions, which is basically on the history of. You mentioned the National Infrastructure Commission. Could you give us some more information? When was it created? What was the function? What is it? How does it work? I mean, you have changed governments, and this National Infrastructure Commission is, I believe, is very, very important. I mean, they have this strategy for the 2050. Actually, it was published, the National Infrastructure Commission in 2020. So basically, how does that National Infrastructure Commission work? Who does it respond to? How does it get integrated in the national planning system? That's one question. Another thing is that how do you measure infrastructure when you have conflicting goals? In your first slide, which is very, very impressive, you mentioned that the idea is to have infrastructure to improve productivity and to improve inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, you mentioned that people have to have equal access and equal opportunities, people in general, but I suppose you can divide that by many, many types of classification. And in the whole presentation, I think that perhaps it would be interesting whether your office does measure the inclusiveness. I mean, all the slides dealt very much with the value of assets, etc. But does your commission or does your unit go ahead and measure inclusiveness? I mean, and also measure productivity. I mean, you just started from the definition that infrastructure is something that helps productivity and helps inclusiveness. And then you presented this beautiful set of slides. And one wonders, does it really improve productivity, all the infrastructure? Does it really improve inclusiveness, productivity? Let's say yes. Okay, but I won't argue that. But in some countries, sometimes we build bridges that go nowhere, or we build a dam that then dries up in the next week. And here there's a priori principle that practically every infrastructure created by the government is going to be productive and it's going to be inclusive. So are you working on the measurement of infrastructure in the sense that you decided to define infrastructure as something that helps productivity and helps inclusiveness? So that's my basic two questions. And the other one are technical challenges. I like very much your last slide. I liked everything. I congratulate the three of you, obviously, and the ONS having you there. How difficult it is, you mentioned conceptual challenges and conceptual developments and technical developments, and quality. How do you measure quality, right? Because do you measure it, or are you thinking of measuring it from the sense of the consumer, of the user, this type of revealed preference type of thing? How much are you willing to pay for, etc., willingness to pay, etc., or how are you going to measure that? And Essentially, well, that's it. And my thanks. If you would like to respond to this first, and then I'll give the floor to the number of questions that are appearing here in my cell phone, because, well, my infrastructure is not so modern that I can see the questions on the screen, but that's another story. Thank you very much.
Thank you for these questions. Let me take things one by one. So the National Infrastructure Commission is an independent body. So they were set up originally in 2015 and they started working in 2017. Their role is to undertake a national infrastructure assessment during each parliament. So they do not report to anybody. They are completely independent and they have an advisory role. So when a parliament announces their infrastructure plans, and then the National Infrastructure Commission goes in and assesses it. And because they are impartial and it is a board of experts, we work closely with them because the ONS is also an independent arm's length body. So we, the independent ones, work together to assess what is otherwise planned.
You're public servants, both of you, right, or not?
Correct.
Oh, they're independent. The National Infrastructure Commission, they are civil servants.
Yes.
But independent. Yes. Okay. Not private sector.
No, not private sector. So we are independent, they are also independent, and we assess. We provide the data in an impartial way, and they use our data to assess any government policies. For example, how close is the UK to achieving net zero? How close is the UK to provide services as agreed by a government when they put the policy together? So that is their role. Then productivity and inclusiveness.
One question, sorry to interrupt. The role is only to give an opinion, but they cannot veto anything. They cannot say you shouldn't do this, you should do that, etc. It's just an expert commission that they say, well, this is happening and good luck.
Yes,
but they cannot say, please don't do this.
Yes, once they give their assessment, it has to be discussed in the parliament, but that is very much a political decision, not a civil service decision. So we will publish the data. They will check against their data. They will assess the announced policies, and then they will report to Parliament whether they're likely to go the way the Parliament had decided. So it is very much a mechanism to check how things are going. Now, productivity and inclusiveness. The work on infrastructure started because the UK faced the so-called productivity puzzle. Since 2010, we have seen a very, very slow growth of productivity. Although GDP is growing, productivity per capita has been staying flat. So back then, Joe Grice thought, okay, there must be reasons behind that. Let us start measuring new things in case we get better insights. Academic literature connects productivity with economic infrastructure. For example, many developing countries will be told, if you want to industrialize, you have to build ports, roads, connect production with distribution and export. So if you have an export-led economy, the standard recipe to industrialize is to provide export infrastructure. So drawing from that, the work on infrastructure and the other bit of work that we do, the work on intangibles, started to see if we can offer more insights when it comes to productivity puzzle. The ONS, as an independent body that provides data, in our mandate is that we provide data for the public good, has to also take into account when we present our data, how they can be used to improve the quality of life, which brings us to this idea of inclusiveness. This idea of inclusiveness is also linked to a government priority that has been that was announced 3 or 4 years ago, and that is on leveling up. London is a very well-known economic center globally, but other parts of the UK less so, although they have talent and resources and potential. So the idea of leveling up is measuring how much investment in infrastructure goes, for example, to London, that has already dense and advanced infrastructure, as opposed, for instance, to Wales or the north of England. So the idea of presenting data not just for the UK, but for different areas of the UK brings us back to this inclusiveness. And again, this draws from academic literature that says, well, if people have access to good quality infrastructure, so if they have reliable electricity, they're able to work and perform better. So their productivity is higher, they have warmer houses, they have light at night, they feel safer when they're out in the street, they don't need to take their car because there is a train, for example. And these are the priorities behind presenting our statistics. So first, productivity that you very correctly spotted, and second, improving quality of life. Then you also mentioned quality of infrastructure and how we measure that. Right now, we don't have that. We cannot tell how much, at least my team, how much quality of infrastructure affects the life of citizens. I believe that there are other teams in our broader division that are looking at quality of life indicators that have things such as public infrastructure there. I could find their contacts and share them if that is of interest. You also mentioned revealed preferences and this type of work. We are doing this type of work for a different output that we are preparing. So that is separate from infrastructure, but we are testing this methodology. We are trying to measure cultural and heritage capital, and this is a publication that will come next spring, I believe. And one of the ways that we are trying to measure that is by revealed preference. How much do people value access to a museum or something like that? How much does this improve their life? This is a very small piece of work. We're doing a pilot on this, but it would be very interesting to see if we could do something similar for infrastructure. The reason, as I said, we have not done it is because we have the quality of life indicators. I don't know if Domenica or Regan would like to add anything to that.
It seems that they don't want to add anything. Well, then let me just read some more questions. Is that okay with you? I'm going to read 3 questions from the audience, and then I'll give the floor to my other colleagues at the INEGI, Ricardo, Fausto, and Enrique. Domenica, here you go. From Francisco Javier Medina. How do you estimate the service life of physical infrastructure such as roads, which are subject to maintenance and prolong their usefulness indefinitely? Now, again, I would also, I would also like to add that our colleagues at the ONS, no, this is you, if I understand the second question, if I understand correctly, this publication focuses in findings about investment on infrastructure in the UK. Further research should aim to find the improvements on economy, trading, life, quality, education, etc. That's a question. And I have another question, myself, which is the theory or the perspective of inclusiveness, Eurydice, is basically regional. So in the sense that the more infrastructure is distributed in a better way, in a better regional way, inclusiveness will improve. But I was wondering whether you are also intending at the ONS and in your team, think about inclusiveness in another perspective, not only regional, but say by age, old people, women, children, you name it, ethnic groups, whatever. So, because one would say, well, more hospitals, yes, hopefully people will get access, but we don't know whether people in wheelchairs will really be able to go to a hospital because there's simply no way to get there. But anyway, that's the third question. If you want to address those three questions, and then I'll give the floor to Ricardo and yes. Well, wait, another one. What are the mechanisms that you usually use to obtain infrastructure information from companies and other private organizations? And finally, another one is considering conflicting goals. Is there a chance that you have enough infrastructure in specific sectors, transport, energy, and the new investment should be directed to other sectors such as risk management, or replace the existing ones with more sustainable alternatives? Yes, how do you deal with conflicting goals? Because you have the idea of fairer, greener, and faster, and sometimes faster and greener may not go together.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I will let Domenica talk about the maintenance and physical infrastructure, and then I will respond to the rest.
Yes, basically this the information that we use come from other teams in ONS. They specifically deal with the PIMS method. The information basically on the assets life varies between industries, and that is based on information from the different sectors. But for this, really, the specific information can come specifically from the team working on PIM. Because we receive basically the data, we understand the method, but then all these specifications are directly, the information come directly from the team. And I think you will have a meeting with them sometime soon with this other team working on PIM. So I think they will provide very detailed information about this.
Thank you.
So the next question by Soto Miranda Alberto. Further research should aim to find the improvements on economy, trading, life, quality, education. Yes, and we have different units at the ONS that are looking at different parts of economic life. I would invite you to go to our website, which is being refurbished right now. So we are making improvements in our website too, and go through the different publications, because we have publications on import exports, on life quality, on health indicators and education outcomes. So all this is there. When we publish individual outputs like ours, our role is limited to publishing and showing the data. However, we have a regular what is called economic forums, where our chief economist, who has the beautiful task of taking everything and synthesizing and presenting the state of the economy, does this for the UK. Then the second question, what are the mechanisms that we usually use to obtain infrastructure information with companies and other private organizations? These do not come directly to us, they go to other teams. For example, Domenica mentioned different sources of data. For example, the construction team talks with companies that engage in construction. We also have the annual business survey, the so-called ABS, where companies in the UK are a big sample of companies in the UK are selected from the total number of companies, and they have to, it's a mandatory survey, and it's quite rich, and it gives us a lot of information. So this is the source of private data. When we are looking at specific priorities, we reach out directly to users of our data that we know of. For example, the National Infrastructure Commission is a user of our data, so we have this relationship. Also, regional authorities, when it comes to roads, Domenica has worked a lot on transportation and roads, and has built a very close working relationship with local authorities on understanding how they finance, how they want to analyze, how they want to use our data. Then conflicting goals. This is a very fine balance. However, we are lucky not to have to make the decisions. So we are not the ones that decide investment. We don't decide, oh, shall we go for green or shall we go for cheap? And now with the cost of living crisis in the UK, we have witnessed significant increase in prices. In the civil service, we are not the ones that make the decisions, but we are the ones that simply observe. However, we need to address again the needs of our users. The Treasury, which is our equivalent of Ministry of Finance, is a user of our data, and they want to know how much investment is in private port infrastructure or how much investment goes into public port infrastructure. For instance, when we're looking at privatization drives, or when we are looking at things such as new investment, as Regan presented. So our role there is simply to present the picture. We don't have any involvement in policy, but because quite often we need to address all this, we have to show every aspect. For instance, we had this graph where it showed that one of the UK regions, Humber, had spiked 173%, if I remember, 176% increase in investment. So whoever in the government or a policymaker sees something like that, comes back to us and says, what's that? It looks wrong. We will have to justify. So we observe, we present, but we will also need to be able to explain. And that's how we found out that this relates to renewable energy infrastructure. I don't know if this covers all questions asked so far.
I think it does, Eurydice. Thank you very much. Let me give the opportunity to our experts at INEGI to ask questions. Fausto, Enrique, or Ricardo, please go ahead. In any order that you want. Fausto.
I don't have any specific question. I just would like to mention that I really enjoyed the presentation. I think it was very clear. You guys are very good. You make great presentations. So I don't have any particular. Perhaps when we start working, I will have so many questions, but then it's going to be very late. But anyway, I have all your references to read. So I'll be reading all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fausto. Enrique, are you there? I saw you.
Yeah, gracias, Juan Carlos. Hice una pregunta, ya la respondieron. Muchas gracias y también gracias por la presentación. Felicitaciones.
Congratulations, thank you. And he already asked you on the chat, which I can't see. Ricardo?
Okay, well, as I'm not one of the experts, but I'm coming from INEGI, I would like to thank you, the three of you. And as I understand, it's a big thing going on there on infrastructure in the UK. So we should follow all the prompts that are coming from the Commission, from the ONS, and some other bodies that you have already put together there. I would like to just ask how you're doing this connection between the academy, between the experts from the academy and yourself there at the ONS, because as I read from the beginning of the first documents, there were people from, as I understand, not from inside the ONS. It was like a input coming from the academia. How does this work there? Because it's something that we are also trying to develop with Enrique, Juan Carlos, Fausto, and some others, specialists in specific kinds of infrastructure. We're wanting to start.
Thank you very much for your kind words.
Roads, and I mean the most near to the economic performance of, and then we'll try to move to the social, hospitals and schools and some other things. But as each of the infrastructure is very specialized in the way it is constructor and the services that should be rendered, I was wondering how you interact with this kind of expertise you're needing to understand the specifics of the different infrastructures. That would be my question. Thank you.
I will let Regan and Domenica reply this, because they have been the ones that have been knocking on many, many doors, and I will respond to the end. So Regan, would you like to respond? And Domenica?
Yeah, so we've been reaching out to various people that we found are users. We kind of, because we took on this work recently, there were some that we'd found in old files. So we recontacted people that we know had been involved in the past. The previous owner of this work, I think he worked with a placement student who came to ONS to work on this, but it wasn't specifically because it was for infrastructure. I don't think. I think it was just kind of a chance that he was working on it with him. I'm not sure what to add to that.
Domenica?
Okay. My experience is not directly with academics, is with other organizations. What I did
You're an
was
academic, Domenica. You're an academic. Let me remind you.
Yeah, no. In order to identify stakeholders and to start collaboration, I basically I went through the annual accounts of different organizations, and then I contacted them with queries about different information from their accounts about infrastructure. There was information on plant equipment, and I really wanted to know more about it. And then basically it was really about sharing our common interest for infrastructure. And based on this common interest, we had just started a collaboration to try obtaining some granular data based on the definition that I show in my presentation, because what we really would like to get is the granular data in line with the system of national accounts, because that is used worldwide. And at the moment is what we have at ONS, and would be important to continue that at the granular data level, but at the same time it seems very promising international, because it would be based on common source that every country could really replicate. I hope it answered your question.
Yes, it gives me a sense of what you're doing there. Thank you.
Can I add
Please.
2 things more? So in the UK, we have something that is called the Whitehall Industry Group Initiative, and it is a forum designed to bring industry leaders and civil servants together to discuss different priorities. So they have been organizing a lot of infrastructure talks, especially around the green space, so non-fossil fuel infrastructure investment, and we have been attending these. We have not been participating, but attending and trying to hear what is the interest. Also, the UNS has its own academic research institute. It's called ESCO, Economic Center. Sorry, I don't remember the initials. Economic and Social.
Yes,
Excellence Research Center. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Where we put bids for research, and then the center contacts different academics to do the work for us, and then we will have to work with them to have oversight. This also is there to give us a bit of freedom to play around with ideas that are more experimental. And finally, in the UK, in the National Statistics Office, we have different, we have people of different skills. We have statisticians, we have economists, we have data scientists. In my team, we are statisticians and economists. So Domenica is a very experienced statistician, Regan and I are economists. So the government has something that is called the Government Economic Service, and it gives us the opportunity to via them to reach out to academics working on different types of areas that we're interested in. For instance, when we were thinking about the definition and how we can expand it to include green infrastructure, we reached out to academics from the London School of Economics to tell us what is the state of the art when it comes to infrastructure and green infrastructure and adaptive infrastructure. And then we discussed this with the National Infrastructure Commission to see, oh, do you have similar needs, and see what we could do together. So we go around knocking many, many doors. Not everybody answers, but we keep knocking on doors.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to make another question regarding, you said that you're building experimental statistics, experimental information. Are you planning to go to the regular, and in what part of these are you? Because I'm also at the research part in INEGI, and we do also experimental, and I know that it's not easy to go from the experimental to the official line of statistics, because it's really hard to be compromised to that kind of official information. But just to have an idea as you're going very forward now in this process.
Yes, the long-term goal is that after experimental statistics, we will move to a satellite account. And then from a satellite account, it can become national statistics. There are challenges in this journey, and we are trying slowly to meet the needs of each step. So from experimental data to go to satellite accounts, so look in the system of accounts where this could go, and then what would be the next step from a satellite account into incorporation in the national accounts. This is something that we achieved with our other publication partially on intangibles. We have some in the national accounts, but it is very much a process in flux. And I think what will be crucial in this journey is the new SNA, the SNA 25. So I suppose, so that we don't have to make too many changes, we will wait until we have a bit more certainty about SNA 25 and then move to the next stage. But this again depends on many factors. Ideally, this is what we would like to do.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. Yes, we should learn a lot about the process also.
Let me add another question then, Ricardo. Eurydice and in Regan and Domenica, in your initial moments or minutes of this presentation, you said, or you told us that the whole idea of measuring stocks and infrastructure came with a productivity puzzle, that, well, why, what happened to productivity? So then after you've done all that amount of work, how is the productivity puzzle explained? Have you been able to provide some inputs to answer that question or not?
We have a dedicated team that looks at that. So we have the multi-factor productivity team, and they publish their annual and quarterly productivity estimates. So I will refer you to their work. But there is also some work forthcoming on regional productivity, where all these effects will be much more visible. So
and
I will
hope
refer
that
you to my...
infrastructure is really important, right? Because if it's not important, then who knows what happened.
I will refer you to the forthcoming publications of my colleagues for these.
Thank you very much, because at the end, it depends how you measure productivity also, not only how you measure capital stocks, because, well, there's many ways of measuring productivity, total productivity, factor productivity, labor productivity, you name it, and then correcting it by the impact on the environment, etc. Well, personally speaking, I'm delighted with your presentations. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Ricardo, I'll give you the floor for the last words, and Eurydice and Domenica and Regan, I don't know whether you want to add something before I give the floor to Ricardo. Would you like to add anything?
I see that there are two questions in the chat. I know that you cannot see them. If it is okay, Can I answer?
Yes,
do.
please. One from Maria del Carmen Reyes Guerrero. Yes, go ahead, please.
So, no, we don't have any relationship with the Ordnance survey regarding the regional economy. We don't use their data. It's the regional capital team that uses their data, and also the regional productivity team that will look at what they are doing. That's a very quick answer, sorry. And then from Carrera Riva Palacio, Sergio. From a methodological perspective, what kind of challenges did you face to generate more information that allows to make visible the progress towards a net zero economy? The answer is we haven't been able to do that yet, because that depends on, first, the availability of data and being able in the data to tell what part of investment goes into renewable resources and what goes into ordinary resources is very difficult. So even companies themselves don't have that. For example, when it comes to energy, there is only 100% non-fossil fuel energy supplier in the UK, producer and supplier in the UK. The rest are mixed, and that makes it very difficult. And the second one is that we have not used PIM for that, the perpetual inventory method. And my colleagues that are going to present on the 14th of August will be able to discuss on the work that they did on PIM and land specifically, which is an example of the challenges there.
Thank you.
I think these are the last words from me.
14th of October, not of August, I hope.
Oh, yes, sorry.
October, yes.
Ricardo, thank you.
very
Domenica, Regan, I don't know.
No, thank you for having us.
Yes, I was going to say, here's another question from Francisco Guillén. Please, Paco Guillén, can you just pick your microphone and ask yourself? Would be very nice to hear you also, please.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and thank you. That was amazing presentations, and of course, I have a lot of questions, but I would like to know something around this digital infrastructure. That has a very big challenge in relation with how to measure it, how to classify this kind of infrastructure. And from the PIN method, that means that you have to look very carefully the service life of this digital infrastructure. This is one question. And the other is in relation with the communication. When we are looking to the users, is very complex to communicate in, let's say, easy words for the people. What means infrastructure and what we are looking to put in his idea, this kind of method, the PIN method, for example, is very difficult to say to the users what means and which is the process and what are the easy words to explain this kind of. Do you have some specific strategy to communicate these kind of things? This is one, and the other is in relation, of course, for the digital assets or infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Digital infrastructure. In our calculations, in our experimental statistics, we are looking at telecommunications infrastructure, and that is specifically hardware. Software is measured separately in intangible assets. And the work that we are doing separately to infrastructure in intangible assets covers software and databases. Now, I think it was last week that you had Stats Canada to talk about their statistics. So Stats Canada are doing quite pioneering work on separating digital assets. Again, not within infrastructure. So they are looking at software, data science, and databases separately. So I like this question because it is a very big challenge to understand exactly what is a digital asset. And there are ongoing discussions globally about that. Where does it sit in relation to infrastructure? Where does it sit in relation to intangibles? And where does it sit in relation to the types of inputs required to produce that? Because now with the emergence of AI, for example, when it comes to producing databases, the human factor has becoming obsolete. So we cannot match it to a human professional activity to look at investment, which is the traditional way of dealing with that. Then communicating with users complex notions. I will pass this to Regan because Regan had to study all the ONS guidelines on how to write an article and the bulletins of statistics in a very, very simple way. So Regan did all this work for us. Regan, would you like to say a few things about it?
Yeah, so at ONS, we have a dedicated website just to look at how we communicate. So I think it's an ONS policy to have, or to try and have, a uniform form of communication with our users. So things like, one of the prompts is that if you can take a word out, then take a word out. But it's not just writing style, it's also things like data sets that you attach. So with all of our articles, we also attach a data set, and it's also things like log in the titles as titles in Excel and little things like that. So it's a long process to learn it because there's things you wouldn't think about for accessibility reasons, but we do have guidelines on our, do you remember what the website was called? It's style.ons, and there's loads and loads on there.
I can quickly see if I can find it before we close and put it.
Yes, I'll post a link into the chat now.
Thank you. Thank you, Paco, for your question. Thank you, Eurydice, Domenica, and Regan for your answers. Let me give the floor again to Ricardo because he's going to make an announcement concerning the next presentations. Not in August. I don't think we're going to reach August, but perhaps. Ricardo, there you go.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I was just wanted to say thank you for you three. And you have mentioned, yes, that on October 14th, we're going to have this conference on capital stock user guide in the UK. So I think we're going to have some more answers to some of the questions and more in-depth information of your experience there at the UK. And before that, we're having on September 13th, another, it would be a panel discussion. We're going to have Jorge Witzenburg from the OECD and James Tibrake from the IMF. They're going to talk about the national accounts and the infrastructure measurement. They're building a very interesting guideline on how to do this, to measure infrastructure and link it to the national accounts. And we're having Paco Guillén, which you know already, as a chair for that session. So we'll go also wanting to have you all there. And thank you very much for joining this conference from this morning.
Thank
That
you.
would be all.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias
Hasta
a
luego.
todos. Thank you. Congratulations.
Gracias.